Welcome to this fifth talk on classical Athens, produced by the Classics Department at East London Science School. Today I will be talking to you about classical Athenian philosophy. Now, Greek philosophy doesn't actually start in Athens, nor does it start in the 5th century BC, the classical period. In fact, it started mainly in Greece on the coast of Ionia, modern-day Turkey, Western Turkey. And the group of philosophers we look at first are called the pre-Socratics, evidently those who came before Socrates. Among their number, they can include Thales, Heraclitus, and the famous mathematician Pythagoras. And their ideas were really the first time that the ancient Greeks started to question the universe around them. For example, Heraclitus talks a lot about balance and about whenever you have one thing in life, there must be something contrasting this. Through the pre-Socratics, we can see that the Greeks start to question the world and start to really open up what philosophy is. But most of their ideas, partly because their writings have not survived that much, are quite limited in their scope for us to study. The next main movement in ancient Greek philosophy was the Sophists. Socrates claims that this movement was started by Protagoras, and he was a traveling sophist. So the Sophists were a group who traveled around Greece teaching people philosophy for a fee. And for that reason, Plato and Socrates rather ridiculed them. Some of their key ideas are the idea of constant motion versus standing still, so the idea of a constant state of flux, and also the contrast between nomos and physis. So nomos being the laws of the city, ones which can change and depend on where you are in Greece, and physis being the laws of nature, which were unchangeable. We finally come to 5th century Athenian classical philosophy, and we start with Socrates. Now, some of Socrates' ideas, it's difficult to tell whether they were really his or whether they were those held by his pupil Plato. That is because Socrates himself did not write down anything. Plato recorded Socrates' ideas, but for that reason, some of them, we are not sure whether they belong to the teacher or to the pupil. Now, Socrates had the nickname the gadfly. This is because he was considered annoying by many Athenians, constantly asking them questions. And his way of questioning is called the Socratic method or Socratic dialogue. Constantly questioning your opponent in an argument to prove that they are contradicting themselves and they're therefore wrong. Socrates famously put to death in 399 BC for 2 charges. 1, corrupting the minds of the youth of Athens, and 2, not believing in the correct Greek pantheon. Both of these charges he argued against during his time in court, but he was nevertheless found guilty. One thing that is notable is that his friends tried to persuade him to escape before he drank hemlock, the poison, to bring about his death, but he refused, saying that if he truly lived by the rules of the city, he should also die by them as well and respect the decision that had been made. We next come to Plato, the pupil of Socrates, author of some amazing texts. I'll start by a brief description of the Symposium. The Symposium was a Greek party where men would come together and discuss issues about life while passing around a glass of wine. The Symposium by Plato involves a discussion of the meaning of love. So what is the nature of love? And it is one of the first times when the actual Greek word philosophia, love of wisdom, is used. In Socrates' description, through the character of Diotima, of what is love, eventually, Socrates argues, humans come to not love each other, but to love wisdom. And Plato's other main works include The Republic, a discussion of an ideal state, where he makes a conclusion that philosopher kings should be the ones ruling because they are the ones devoted to thought themselves. And this is also the book which contains his famous allegory of the cave, the metaphor which tries to explain the fact that the reality we think we see around us is not really the truth. And instead, there is a world somewhere else, which he calls the forms, where there is a perfect idea of every object and thing from our world in it. And what we see is a mere reflection. One final passage from the Republic is the analogy of the ship, which Plato uses to describe democracy and how a country should be governed, and the fact that it should be a philosopher who is steering the ship of the state. Plato set up his own school in Athens, the Academy, from where our word academics comes from. And one of his pupils was to rise to fame after him, that is Aristotle. Aristotle wrote very widely, not just on philosophy, but he wrote books on science. He wrote a book on poetics, where he examines what makes a good Greek tragedy and what makes a good story. And his main philosophical word, the Ethics, is where he talks about how you should live your life. Whereas Plato, and therefore arguably Socrates, were concerned with high ideas and the fact that reality is somewhere above the world, Aristotle likes to learn things from experience. He is sometimes called the father of empiricism, the idea in science that you must use evidence to prove something. Aristotle's other key ideas are that of the golden mean. So if you have a choice between something too extreme or something less extreme, you should always choose the middle way, and this is a good rule for how you should live your life. Aristotle is extremely influential throughout the medieval ages, and a lot of even religious thought is based on Aristotle. Final point to mention is that Aristotle was also a tutor to Alexander the Great. It is perhaps therefore quite strange that actually Aristotle was not that well known during the Hellenistic times, but only came back during the medieval period and later. That is a brief overview of Athenian philosophy. What is clear is that their ideas, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, have been incredibly influential throughout not just philosophy, but a lot of literature written since then.